Greetings, Guardians. This is Olympus Alliance. And today we are stepping into something that changes the way Phobos is going to be played, understood, and feared on the battlefield, because for a long time Phobos has always been that specialist hero, the one you bring when you want control, the one you trust to shut down the strongest enemy, the one that slowly suffocates a fight by removing options from your opponent. But now, with RELICS entering his kit, that identity is no longer just control, it is pressure, it is consistency, and it is something that builds over time until the enemy simply cannot function anymore. And this is the key thing to understand from the very beginning. RELICS are not just stats, they are not just upgrades, they are not something you look at once and forget, they are extensions of how a hero behaves inside a fight. They change timing, they change energy flow, they change how often abilities are used, and in the case of Phobos, they amplify exactly what already made him dangerous, which is control applied at the right moment against the right target. So what we are going to do in this video is go step by step, relic by relic, but not in a rushed way, not just reading what they do. We are going to connect what they do with what actually happens in a fight, because that is where the real value is, and that is where you begin to understand why this is not just a small upgrade. This is a shift in how Phobos impacts the game. And we begin with the first relic. Chains of Fear. Now look at what this does in practice, because this is where things start to become very clear. Every 12 seconds, starting 5 seconds into the fight, Phobos will paralyze the nearest enemy for 4 seconds, and that alone already tells you everything about the direction of this relic, because this is not random control, this is structured, repeated, guaranteed disruption that starts early and continues throughout the fight. Think about that timing for a second. 5 seconds into the battle, most teams are just beginning to build momentum, energy is starting to rise, abilities are about to be triggered, and right at that moment, Phobos steps in and removes one hero from the fight completely for 4 seconds, and in a fast-paced game like this, 4 seconds is not a small window, it is enough to break a combo, it is enough to delay an ultimate, it is enough to completely change the outcome of an engagement before it even properly begins. And then it repeats. Every 12 seconds. This is where the real pressure comes from, because now the enemy cannot settle into a rhythm, they cannot rely on their rotations, they cannot expect consistency, because every 12 seconds, something is taken away from them, and over time that builds frustration, it builds mistakes, and it opens space for your team to take control of the fight. But there is another layer here that makes this even more dangerous, and that is the fact that it targets the nearest enemy, because that usually means frontline or key positioning heroes, and removing those heroes, even temporarily, creates openings, it creates exposure, and it allows your damage dealers to do their job without resistance. So what this relic is really doing is not just adding control. It is structuring the fight around disruption. It is forcing the enemy to play under pressure, it is breaking their timing again and again, and it is giving your team the advantage in moments that matter the most. And this is only the beginning. Because as we move through the relics, what you are going to see is that this is not just about one effect, it is about layering control, stacking pressure, and turning Phobos into a hero that does not just react to the battlefield, but actively controls how that battlefield evolves from start to finish. So now that you understand what Chains of Fear really does inside a fight, let's move forward and look at what comes next. And now we move into the next step where Phobos stops being just a control specialist and starts becoming something much more oppressive over time, because what we are looking at here is not a new skill but an evolution of his core identity, Paralysis, the ability that already defines how he controls the most dangerous enemy on the battlefield by targeting the hero with the highest magic attack, locking them completely so they cannot move or attack, while at the same time dealing continuous magic damage and reducing the attack of the entire enemy team, and that combination alone already makes Phobos one of the most destructive heroes in the game, because he doesn't just remove one threat, he weakens everything around it while doing so. Now when we introduce the relic at level 10, the behavior of this skill changes in a very important way, not by replacing what it does but by amplifying how it evolves during the fight, because instead of simply applying control and damage, every consecutive hit of the skill increases the damage over time, which means that the longer the target is locked, the more dangerous that lock becomes, and suddenly we are no longer talking about a simple disable. We are talking about a scaling execution that builds while the enemy cannot respond, and that alone already shifts the value of the skill from control into pressure. But the real transformation comes at the moment where the skill would normally end, because instead of simply releasing the target and giving the enemy team a chance to recover, the effect now expands and applies paralysis to enemies around the original target, turning what used to be a single target lockdown into a moment of area disruption. And this is where the flow of the fight starts to break, because teams rely heavily on timing. They rely on that small window where control ends to activate abilities, to recover momentum, to counter-attack, and this relic removes that window completely by chaining control into another layer of control. So what you get in practice is a sequence where Phobos identifies the strongest magic threat, locks it completely, builds damage on it over time, weakens the entire team while doing so, and just when the enemy expects to regain control of the fight, that control spreads, affecting more heroes and extending the disruption across the battlefield, and that moment is what creates pressure, not because of raw numbers, but because it denies the opponent the ability to play their own rhythm. And when you connect this with what we already saw from Chains of Fear, the pattern becomes very clear, because now control is no longer occasional or reactive, it is structured, it is timed, it is repeated, and it begins to overlap, meaning the enemy team is constantly being interrupted at key moments, constantly losing access to their strongest tools, and constantly forced into a position where they are reacting instead of acting. This is where Phobos starts to feel completely different in real fights, because instead of being a hero that answers a specific threat, he becomes a hero that shapes the entire battlefield, controlling not just one enemy but influencing multiple interactions at once, creating openings, breaking tempo, and forcing mistakes simply by denying consistency to the opponent. And the important thing to understand here is that this is only the level 10 relic, this is not the final form of what his relic system is going to do, this is the point where the scaling begins, where control starts to chain into pressure, and where Phobos transitions from a situational pick into something that can define how fights unfold from start to finish. So when you look at this upgrade, don't just look at the extra damage or the additional effect, look at how it changes the flow of the battle, because that is where the real power is. It removes recovery, it extends disruption, and it turns every successful control into an opportunity to control even more, and once that cycle begins, the enemy team is no longer playing comfortably, they are constantly being pushed out of their timing, and that is exactly where Phobos becomes dangerous again. And now we move even deeper into his kit, and this is where Phobos stops being only about control and starts becoming a real damage enabler for the entire team, because what we are looking at here with Dreaded Shadow is not just an increase in numbers, it is a shift in how damage is applied to the enemy, especially against the most dangerous targets on the battlefield, and to understand why this matters we first need to look at how the skill behaves without the relic. In its base form, Dreaded Shadow already targets the enemy with the highest magic attack, which is always a priority threat, and it reduces their magic defense while dealing damage over time, and this is already strong because it weakens exactly the target that your team wants to eliminate, making them more vulnerable while pressure is being applied, but it is still limited in duration and impact. It creates an opening, but that opening can still be managed by the opponent. Now when we introduce the level 20 relic, that limitation starts to disappear, because the reduction of magic defense becomes significantly stronger, and more importantly, it keeps pushing the target further down, to the point where their magic defense can reach 0, and that is the moment where everything changes, because once that happens, the target is no longer just vulnerable, the target starts taking bonus damage. And this is where the real power of this relic sits, because now Phobos is not just controlling and weakening, he is preparing execution, he is creating a situation where the enemy's strongest magic hero becomes the weakest point in their entire team, and once that threshold is reached, the damage from all sources becomes more effective, not just from Phobos, but from every magic-based ally you have on the field. So what you start to see in real fights is a very clear progression. First the enemy is controlled, then their damage is reduced, then their defense is stripped away, and finally, once that defense is gone, they become a target that cannot survive sustained pressure, and that sequence is extremely difficult to deal with because it removes layers of protection step by step. And when you combine this with what we already saw before, the picture becomes even more dangerous, because now you are stacking control from paralysis, repeated disruption from chains of fear, and defense reduction from dreaded shadow, and all of these effects are targeting priority enemies, which means the opponent is constantly losing their most important hero while at the same time becoming more vulnerable across the board. This is where Phobos stops being a situational counter and starts becoming a core piece of a strategy, because he is no longer just answering threats, he is creating opportunities, he is shaping targets, and he is amplifying the effectiveness of your entire team by removing one of the most important defensive stats in the game at the exact moment where damage matters the most. And this is the key thing to understand about this relic. It is not just about increasing damage, it is about changing the condition of the target, turning a strong hero into a fragile one, and once that transition happens, the fight shifts immediately in your favor, because the enemy can no longer rely on that hero to carry the battle. So now, instead of Phobos simply stopping a threat, he is enabling its destruction, and when you combine that with the control and pressure we already discussed, you start to see a complete system forming, one that controls, weakens and then eliminates, all in a continuous flow that becomes harder and harder to interrupt the longer the fight goes on. And now we reach the final step. And this is where everything comes together, because what we are looking at here with Seal of Exhaustion is not just another layer of control or damage, it is something that attacks the very core of how fights are played in hero wars, and that is energy, because if control removes actions and damage removes health, energy defines when a hero can actually fight back, and this relic goes directly into that system and starts breaking it from the inside. In its base form, this effect already targets the enemy with the highest energy, which means it naturally locks onto the hero that is closest to making an impact, the one that is about to use an ultimate, the one that is about to change the fight, and instead of allowing that moment to happen, it interferes with it by burning part of that energy whenever the target reaches maximum energy, which immediately delays their ability to act and disrupts the timing that teams rely on so heavily. But the real strength of this relic is not just in that initial disruption, it is in the way the effect persists and transfers, because once the curse is applied, it does not simply disappear when the target is removed or when the effect is triggered, it moves, it finds the next enemy with the highest energy, and continues the cycle, meaning that throughout the fight there is always pressure being applied to the hero that is closest to becoming a threat. So what you get in practice is not a single interruption, but a continuous denial of momentum, where ultimates are delayed, timings are broken, and the enemy is constantly forced to rebuild energy instead of executing their strategy, and when you combine this with everything we have already discussed, the picture becomes very clear, because now Phobos is not just controlling, not just weakening, not just preparing targets for execution, he is also controlling when the enemy is allowed to play the game. And this is where the full system reveals itself, because chains of fear structures repeated control, paralysis locks and spreads disruption while building damage, dreaded shadow strips defenses and prepares targets for elimination, and now Seal of Exhaustion removes the ability of the enemy to respond at the most critical moments, creating a complete loop where the opponent is constantly under pressure, constantly delayed, and constantly losing control of the fight. This is no longer about one ability or one moment, this is about domination over time, about shaping the entire flow of the battle from beginning to end, and that is why Phobos, with these relics, becomes something completely different from what he used to be, because he is no longer a niche answer to magic damage dealers, he is becoming a central piece in controlling tempo, breaking strategies, and enabling your team to dictate how the fight evolves. And this is exactly why we are going to take this even further, because understanding the relics is only the first step, The real power comes when you start building around them, when you start combining Phobos with heroes that benefit from disrupted timing, from reduced defenses, from delayed ultimates, and from constant control, and that is where things get really interesting, because with the new mechanics in the game, with the changes to damage over time, with the way fights are now being played, Phobos is entering a space where he can be used much more frequently and much more effectively than before. So in the next step, we are going to explore that, we are going to test combinations, we are going to look at teams, we are going to see where Phobos fits best in the current meta, and how you can take full advantage of everything we have just broken down, because this is not just a rework, this is not just an upgrade, this is an opportunity to bring Phobos back into relevance in a much bigger way than most players expect. Stay tuned, stay sharp. And as always, salute and friendship.